Injured puppy rescued from river. Their journey together will amaze you. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The sound of rushing water echoed through the quiet valley as Luke made his way along the riverbank. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the rippling surface of the water. For Luke, these morning walks had become a lifeline, a way to clear his mind and escape the weight of his thoughts. Life had felt hollow lately, each day blending into the next without purpose or direction. He was about to turn back toward home when something caught his eye, a small, dark shape bobbing in the water. At first, he thought it was debris, a branch or a clump of weeds caught in the current. But as he squinted against the morning light, his heart clenched. It wasn't debris. It was moving. Luke broke into a run, his boots splashing through the shallow water as he approached. The closer he got, the clearer the shape became. It was a puppy, its tiny body half submerged in the river. Its paws flailed weakly, its head barely above the surface as the current threatened to sweep it away. "Oh no," Luke muttered, his chest tightening. Without a second thought, he waded into the water, the icy chill biting at his legs as he reached for the struggling pup. The current was stronger than it looked, tugging at him as he fought his way closer. His hands closed around the puppy's soaked fur, and he lifted it from the water, cradling it against his chest. The puppy was tiny, no more than a few weeks old, and its body was alarmingly still. Its fur was matted and cold, and one of its legs hung at an odd angle. Luke's heart ached as he looked down at the fragile creature in his arms. "You're okay," he murmured, his voice shaky. "I've got you now." He hurried back to the riverbank, his boots slipping on the wet stones. Once on solid ground, he knelt down and placed the puppy on his jacket, wrapping it tightly to keep it warm. The puppy let out a faint whimper, its eyes fluttering open for just a moment before closing again. "You're a fighter," Luke said, his voice filled with determination. "And I'm going to help you." The drive back to Luke's small cabin was a blur. He kept glancing at the puppy on the passenger seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The puppy's breathing was shallow, its tiny chest rising and falling with effort. Luke felt a surge of urgency. He had to act quickly if the little one was going to survive. At home, Luke cleared a space on the kitchen table, laying the puppy down on a soft towel. He grabbed a bowl of warm water and began cleaning the mud and debris from its fur, his movements gentle but efficient. The puppy flinched slightly as he worked, letting out soft whimpers that broke Luke's heart. "You're safe now," he murmured. "I promise." After cleaning the puppy, Luke examined its injuries. The leg that had been hanging limp in the water was swollen and bruised, and he suspected it was broken. He didn't have the expertise to set a fracture, but he knew he could stabilize it until he could get the puppy to a vet. Using a makeshift splint made from popsicle sticks and bandages, he carefully secured the leg, all the while whispering words of comfort. When he was finished, he wrapped the puppy in a blanket and held it close, its tiny body trembling against him. He could feel its heartbeat, faint but steady, and it gave him a flicker of hope. "You're a tough little one," he said softly. "I can tell." Hours passed as Luke cared for the puppy, feeding it small drops of water and keeping it warm by the fire. By evening, the puppy had started to show signs of improvement. Its eyes opened fully for the first time, and it let out a tiny, tentative bark. Luke laughed, the sound breaking through the heavy silence that had filled his cabin for so long. "Hey there," he said, stroking the puppy's head. "Welcome back." He decided to name the puppy River, a nod to the place where their journey had begun. As he watched River drift off to sleep, nestled in the blanket on the couch, Luke felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. This tiny, fragile creature had needed him, and he had stepped up. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had done something that mattered. The cabin was quiet that night, save for the crackling of the fire and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the puppy nestled in its blanket. Luke sat in a worn armchair nearby, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but his mind too active to sleep. His gaze drifted to the small bundle on the couch. River had barely survived the day, and yet, here he was, holding on with a strength that Luke couldn't help but admire. Luke leaned back, running a hand through his hair. It had been years since he had cared for another living being. After losing his wife in a car accident 2 years earlier, he had retreated into himself, avoiding friends, family, and even the things he used to enjoy. His days were a blur of routine and solitude, the pain of his loss an ever-present shadow. But now something had shifted. River's presence, though small and fragile, felt like a spark of light in the darkness that had consumed him. The puppy's fight for survival mirrored Luke's own struggle, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, Luke woke early to the sound of soft whimpering. He sat up, his heart racing as he looked toward the couch. River was awake, his tiny body wriggling weakly beneath the blanket. Luke smiled, relief flooding through him as he knelt beside the puppy. "Good morning, buddy," he said softly, stroking River's head. "How are you feeling?" River let out a faint bark, his tail wagging ever so slightly. Luke laughed, his chest tightening with emotion. "You're a tough little guy, aren't you?" he said. "Let's get you something to eat." He prepared a small bowl of warm milk, carefully holding it as River lapped at the liquid. The puppy's appetite was weak, but it was a start. Luke watched with a mixture of relief and pride as River finished the milk, his tiny tail wagging again. Over the next few days, Luke focused all his energy on caring for River. He researched how to care for an injured puppy, watching videos and reading articles late into the night. He made a vet appointment for the following week, knowing that River's broken leg needed professional attention. The routine of caring for River brought a sense of structure to Luke's days. He found himself looking forward to the little milestones. The first time River stood on his own, the first time he barked with real energy, the first time he wagged his tail so hard that his whole body wiggled. Each small victory felt like a triumph, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, life could persevere. As River grew stronger, his personality began to shine. He was curious and playful, often nosing around the cabin in search of new adventures. Despite his injured leg, he was determined to explore every corner of his new home. Luke couldn't help but laugh as River hobbled after him, his ears perked and his tail wagging with excitement. One evening, as Luke sat by the fire with a cup of tea, River climbed onto his lap, nuzzling into his chest. Luke smiled, his hand resting on the puppy's tiny frame. "You're something else, you know that?" he said. "You've got more fight in you than anyone I've ever met." River looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, and in that moment, Luke felt a connection deeper than he had ever expected. The puppy wasn't just a companion. He was a reminder of everything Luke had forgotten about life. The resilience, the joy, the simple beauty of being present. A week later, Luke took River to the vet. The small clinic was warm and welcoming, and the staff cooed over the tiny puppy as Luke explained how he had rescued him from the river. The vet, a kind woman named Dr. Harris, examined River carefully, her brow furrowing as she studied his injured leg. "It's definitely broken," she said, her voice gentle, "but you did a good job stabilizing it. We'll put a proper cast on it, and with some rest and care, he should make a full recovery." Luke let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with relief. Dr. Harris smiled. "He's lucky to have you," she said. "Not everyone would have gone to the lengths you did to save him." Luke glanced at River, who was wagging his tail despite the examination. "I think I'm the lucky one," he said softly. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as River continued to heal. Luke took him on short walks around the property, carrying him when he got tired. He played gentle games of tug-of-war with him, careful not to put too much strain on his injured leg. And every evening, they sat together by the fire, River curled up in Luke's lap, his soft snores filling the quiet cabin. The change in Luke's demeanor didn't go unnoticed by his neighbors. One day, as Luke and River walked along the riverbank, an older man named Tom waved them over. "Well, would you look at that?" Tom said, his eyes twinkling as he crouched down to pet River. "I heard about your little rescue mission. This guy's got the whole town talking." Luke chuckled, scratching River behind the ears. "He's a fighter," he said. "I couldn't just leave him there." Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've got a good heart, Luke," he said. "It's good to see you out and about again." The words stayed with Luke long after Tom had walked away. He hadn't realized how much he had withdrawn from the world until River had come into his life. The puppy had given him a reason to engage, to step outside of his own pain and reconnect with the world around him. One crisp autumn morning, Luke and River set out for their longest walk yet. The air was cool and refreshing, the leaves crunching underfoot as they made their way through the woods. River's cast had been removed a few days earlier, and he was eager to stretch his legs, bounding ahead with a newfound energy. Luke watched him with a smile, his heart swelling with pride. "Slow down, buddy," he called. "You're not invincible, you know." River paused, turning to look at Luke with his head tilted in that endearing way that always made Luke laugh. The puppy barked once, his tail wagging, before bounding back toward him. As they reached the top of a hill, Luke stopped to take in the view. The river stretched out below them, glinting in the sunlight. It was the same river where he had found River all those weeks ago, and the sight of it brought a lump to his throat. "You've come a long way," he said, kneeling beside River. "We both have." River wagged his tail, nuzzling into Luke's side. Luke rested a hand on his back, his eyes fixed on the river. In that moment, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The puppy had not only survived, he had thrived. And in doing so, he had reminded Luke of the beauty and resilience of life. As the days turned into weeks, River's progress became more remarkable with each passing moment. The tiny puppy who had once been on the brink of death was now bounding through the woods with unbridled energy, his tail wagging so hard it seemed to propel him forward. Luke could hardly believe how far they had both come. Watching River heal and grow had become the highlight of his days, and he often found himself wondering how he had ever lived without the little dog. River's playful antics brought a new rhythm to Luke's once quiet life. Mornings now started with River pouncing onto the bed, licking Luke's face until he reluctantly got up. They would eat breakfast together, Luke sipping his coffee while River munched on kibble, and then head out for their daily walks. River loved exploring the woods, his nose always leading him to some new discovery. Whether it was a pile of fallen leaves or a curious squirrel darting up a tree, everything seemed to fascinate him. But River's favorite spot was the riverbank. The first time Luke brought him back there, he had hesitated, worried the memory of the cold water and the struggle for survival might frighten the puppy. But River had surprised him. The moment they reached the water's edge, River wagged his tail and dipped a cautious paw into the shallow stream, as if testing its warmth. Then he looked back at Luke, his expression almost triumphant. "This is where it all started, huh?" Luke said, crouching down beside him. "You're not afraid, are you?" River barked, his tail wagging furiously, and Luke laughed. "You're amazing, you know that?" River splashed around happily, his tiny paws kicking up droplets that sparkled in the sunlight. Luke watched him, a smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace, a feeling that life, no matter how difficult, could still hold moments of joy. One afternoon, as Luke and River walked into town to pick up supplies, they caught the attention of several passersby. River had become something of a local celebrity since word of his rescue had spread, and it wasn't uncommon for people to stop and ask about him. "That's the puppy from the river, isn't it?" an elderly woman asked as she approached them outside the general store. "The one you saved?" Luke nodded, smiling as River wagged his tail at the woman. "This is him," he said. "Meet River." The woman knelt down to pet the puppy, her eyes softening. "You're a brave little guy," she said, scratching behind his ears. "And you," she added, looking up at Luke, "you've got a good heart. Not everyone would have done what you did." Luke shrugged, his cheeks flushing slightly. "He needed help," he said simply. "I couldn't just leave him." The woman smiled. "Well, it's clear he ended up exactly where he was meant to be. You saved him, and it looks like he's saving you, too." Luke thought about her words as he walked home with River trotting happily beside him. She was right. River had saved him just as much as he had saved River. The puppy had brought light back into Luke's life, reminding him of what it meant to care for someone, to find joy in the little things, and to keep moving forward no matter how hard life got. As River grew stronger, Luke began to notice something incredible. The puppy had a way of bringing people together. Whether it was the neighbors who stopped to say hello on their walks or the children who ran over to pet him at the park, River seemed to have a magnetic charm that drew everyone in. One day, Luke decided to take River to a community event at the town square. It was a fundraiser for the local animal shelter, and Luke thought it would be a great way to give back. He and River set up a small booth where they shared the story of River's rescue and encouraged people to donate or adopt pets in need. To Luke's surprise, their booth became one of the most popular at the event. People gathered to hear the story. Many of them moved to tears as Luke recounted the day he had found River in the river. River, for his part, was the perfect ambassador, wagging his tail, licking hands, and even letting children cuddle him. By the end of the day, the shelter had raised more money than they had expected, and several animals had been adopted. The shelter director approached Luke with a warm smile. "Thank you," she said. "What you and River did today made a huge difference." His story inspired so many people. Luke looked down at River, who was lying at his feet, his tail thumping against the ground. "He inspires me every day," he said. As River continued to thrive, Luke found himself opening up to the world in ways he hadn't thought possible. He started reconnecting with old friends, accepting invitations to coffee or dinner that he would have once declined. He even began volunteering at the animal shelter, helping other animals find homes just as he had found one for River. The transformation in Luke didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as he sat on the porch with River curled up beside him, his sister Emma called. "I can't believe how happy you sound," Emma said, her voice filled with warmth. "It's like you're a different person." Luke smiled, stroking River's fur. "I think I am," he admitted. "This little guy changed everything." Emma laughed softly. "You know, Mom would have loved him. She always said there's something special about the way dogs can heal us." Luke's chest tightened at the mention of their mother, who had passed away years ago. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She was right." As the conversation ended, Luke sat in the quiet of the evening, his thoughts drifting to his mother. She had always believed in second chances, in finding hope even in the darkest times. And now, thanks to River, Luke understood what she had meant. One morning, as Luke and River walked along their favorite trail by the river, they came across a young girl and her father. The girl was crouched by the water, her eyes wide as she watched a duck paddling nearby. "Is that your dog?" she asked, pointing at River. Luke nodded. "This is River," he said. "What's your name?" "I'm Lily," the girl said, smiling as River approached her, wagging his tail. "He's so cute. Can I pet him?" "Of course," Luke said, watching as Lily gently stroked River's fur. Lily's father smiled. "He's a beautiful dog," he said. "How long have you had him?" Luke hesitated for a moment, then told them the story of River's rescue. The father listened intently, his expression softening as Luke spoke. "That's incredible," he said when Luke finished. "You gave him a second chance, and it sounds like he gave you one, too." Luke smiled, looking down at River. "Yeah," he said. "He really did." As they continued their walk, Luke couldn't help but feel grateful for the path his life had taken. River had come into his life when he needed him most, and together, they had found a way to heal and move forward. As autumn deepened, the bond between Luke and River grew stronger with each passing day. The days were shorter, the air crisper, and the leaves along the riverbank had turned brilliant shades of orange and red. Every walk they took seemed to hold a quiet magic, the kind of beauty that Luke had once overlooked but now cherished. One particularly chilly morning, Luke and River set out early, the mist rising off the river in delicate swirls. River bounded ahead, his paws crunching through the frost-covered grass, his tail wagging furiously. Luke smiled as he watched the little dog explore, his joy contagious. "Don't go too far, buddy," Luke called, his breath visible in the cold air. River barked in response, circling back to Luke's side. The puppy had grown bolder in recent weeks, his initial frailty replaced by a vibrant energy that seemed boundless. Watching him now, It was hard to believe this was the same tiny creature Luke had pulled from the icy river just months earlier. As they continued their walk, Luke's thoughts turned to the future. He had been volunteering at the animal shelter for nearly 2 months now, and it had quickly become one of the most fulfilling parts of his life. Helping other animals find loving homes felt like a way to honor River's journey, a way to give back for the second chance they had both been given. But beyond that, Luke had started to think about how he could make an even bigger impact. He had always been handy with tools and had a knack for fixing things, a skill that had come in handy when he renovated his cabin years ago. Maybe, he thought, he could use those skills to help the shelter improve its facilities or even build new enclosures for the animals. The idea excited him, and as they reached the top of a hill overlooking the valley, Luke crouched down beside River. "What do you think, buddy?" he asked, scratching the dog behind the ears. "Should we try to do something bigger? Help more animals like you?" River tilted his head, his eyes bright as he wagged his tail. Luke laughed. "I'll take that as a yes." That afternoon, Luke paid a visit to the animal shelter to pitch his idea. The director, a kind woman named Karen, listened attentively as he explained his vision. "I've been thinking about how I can give back," Luke said. "You've done so much for animals in this community, but I know the shelter could use some upgrades. I'd love to help you expand. Maybe build some new outdoor play areas or improve the kennels." Karen's face lit up with excitement. "That would be incredible," she said. "We've wanted to make improvements for years, but we've never had the budget for it. If you're willing to help, it could make a huge difference for the animals." Luke smiled, feeling a surge of purpose. "I'm all in," he said. "Just let me know what you need." Over the next few weeks, Luke threw himself into the project. He spent his evenings drawing up plans and researching materials, and his weekends were dedicated to building and renovating at the shelter. River quickly became a regular at the site, trotting around with a sense of importance as he supervised Luke's work. The project quickly became a community effort. Inspired by Luke's dedication, neighbors and local businesses pitched in, donating supplies and volunteering their time. The shelter transformed before their eyes. New outdoor enclosures were built, the kennels were renovated, and a cozy indoor playroom was created for the cats. Karen was overwhelmed with gratitude. "You've done more than just improve the shelter," she told Luke one afternoon. "You've brought the community together." Luke glanced at River, who was napping in the corner of the room, his tail twitching in his sleep. "It's all because of him," Luke said, his voice soft. "River brought me back to life, and now he's helping me give back." As winter approached, the shelter held an open house to celebrate the completion of the renovations. The event was a huge success, with families and animal lovers from all over the area coming to see the improvements and meet the animals. Several adoptions took place that day, and the shelter raised enough funds to cover their expenses for months to come. River, of course, was the star of the event. Children flocked to him, their laughter ringing through the air as they petted and played with him. Luke watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. River had not only changed his life but had also inspired an entire community. As the event wound down, Karen approached Luke with a small plaque in her hands. "We wanted to give you this," she said, handing it to him. Luke looked down at the plaque, his breath catching in his throat. It read, "In honor of River and Luke, for inspiring hope and building a better future for animals." "Thank you," Luke said, his voice thick with emotion. "This means so much." Karen smiled. "No, Luke, thank you. You've done more than you'll ever know." That night, as Luke and River sat by the fire, Luke held the plaque in his hands, turning it over as he reflected on everything that had happened. The cabin was warm and quiet, the soft glow of the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. River lay curled up in his lap, his head resting on Luke's knee. "You did all this, buddy," Luke said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You changed everything." River let out a contented sigh, his tail thumping against Luke's leg. Luke smiled, his hand resting on the dog's soft fur. For so long, he had felt lost, adrift in a sea of grief and loneliness. But River had shown him that even in the darkest moments, there was still light to be found. In the weeks that followed, Luke continued to volunteer at the shelter, his bond with River growing deeper with each passing day. The little puppy who had once been so fragile was now strong and full of life, a constant reminder of the power of love and resilience. Luke often thought about how different his life had become. He had started out as a man broken by loss, his days marked by solitude and sorrow. But River had given him a reason to hope, a reason to believe in second chances. Together, they had built something beautiful, not just a home, but a legacy of kindness and compassion. And as they walked along the riverbank one chilly morning, the sunlight glinting off the water, Luke felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. River trotted beside him, his tail wagging as he looked up at Luke with eyes full of trust and love. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Luke said, his voice soft. River barked, his tail wagging even harder. Luke laughed, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "Yes, we have," he said, "and I wouldn't change a thing." As winter fully set in, the once vivid autumn colors faded into shades of white and gray. Snow blanketed the ground, and the river was partially frozen, its surface glinting under the pale winter sun. The world seemed quieter during this time of year, but for Luke and River, it felt more alive than ever. River loved the snow. He bounded through it with unrestrained joy, kicking up flurries as he chased after sticks Luke tossed. His energy seemed limitless, and his enthusiasm for even the simplest things was infectious. Luke found himself laughing more, his days filled with moments of lightness he hadn't experienced in years. One morning, as they played in the snow-covered yard, Luke heard the crunch of footsteps approaching. He turned to see Tom, his neighbor, walking up the path with a thermos in hand. "Morning, Luke," Tom called, his breath visible in the crisp air. "Thought I'd bring you some coffee. Figured you might need it after keeping up with that ball of energy." Luke chuckled, taking the thermos as Tom gestured to River, who was busy digging a hole in the snow. "Thanks, Tom. He's got more energy than I know what to do with." Tom grinned. "He's a good dog. And he's been good for you, too." Luke nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, he has. More than I ever expected." The two men stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as River finally unearthed a small, frozen stick from beneath the snow. He barked triumphantly, his tail wagging as he trotted over to Luke to show off his prize. Tom chuckled. "You know, it's funny. That little guy's done more to bring this community together than anything else I've seen in years." Luke raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well," Tom said, leaning on his walking stick, "before you found him, you kept to yourself, didn't you? And most of us just went about our business, barely saying more than a hello to each other. But now everyone's talking, helping out with the shelter, coming together for something bigger." Luke glanced down at River, who had plopped down at his feet to gnaw on the stick. "I guess I hadn't thought about it that way," he admitted. "But you're right. He's brought a lot of people together." Tom clapped Luke on the shoulder. "That's the power of a good dog. They remind us what matters most." That conversation stayed with Luke as the days turned into weeks. He began to notice just how much had changed since River had come into his life. People in the community smiled more, stopped to chat during walks, and genuinely seemed more connected. It was a small but profound shift, and Luke couldn't help but feel proud of the role River had played in it. But life wasn't without its challenges. One evening, as Luke prepared dinner, he noticed that River wasn't as energetic as usual. The puppy lay curled up on the rug, his head resting on his paws, his eyes drooping. At first, Luke thought he was just tired from their afternoon walk, but as the hours passed, River's lethargy began to worry him. "Hey, buddy," Luke said, kneeling beside him. "You feeling okay?" River let out a soft whine, his tail wagging weakly. Luke's chest tightened with concern. He scooped the puppy into his arms and placed him in his bed near the fire, covering him with a blanket. But as the night wore on, River's condition didn't improve. By morning, Luke had made up his mind. He called the vet and explained River's symptoms, and they told him to bring the puppy in immediately. The drive to the clinic was tense, Luke's hands gripping the steering wheel as he glanced at River in the passenger seat. The puppy looked up at him with tired eyes, his usual spark dimmed. When they arrived, Dr. Harris greeted them with a reassuring smile. "Let's take a look at him," she said, leading Luke into the examination room. Luke paced nervously as Dr. Harris examined River, her brow furrowing slightly as she listened to his heartbeat and checked his temperature. After what felt like an eternity, she turned to Luke. "It looks like River has a mild infection," she said. "It's not uncommon for young dogs, especially after everything he's been through. But the good news is that it's treatable. I'll give you some antibiotics, and he should start feeling better in a few days." Luke let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with relief. "I was so worried." Dr. Harris smiled. "He's lucky to have you, Luke, and I can tell how much he means to you." "He's everything," Luke said softly, glancing at River, who wagged his tail faintly from the exam table. Over the next few days, Luke devoted himself to River's care. He administered the antibiotics diligently, made sure the puppy stayed warm and hydrated, and spent hours sitting by his side, offering comfort and reassurance. Slowly but surely, River began to recover. His energy returned, his appetite improved, and by the end of the week, he was back to chasing sticks and bounding through the snow. Luke couldn't help but marvel at the puppy's resilience. River had faced so many challenges in his short life, yet he always came through stronger. It was a lesson Luke carried with him, a reminder that no matter how difficult life got, there was always a way forward. As spring approached, the snow began to melt, and the world came alive again. The river flowed freely, the trees budded with new growth, and the air was filled with the chirping of birds. Luke and River returned to their long walks, exploring trails they hadn't visited in months. One sunny afternoon, as they walked along the riverbank, Luke spotted a family picnicking nearby. A little boy, no more than 5 years old, ran over to them, his eyes wide with excitement. "Can I pet him?" the boy asked, pointing at River. Luke smiled. "Of course. His name's River." The boy crouched down, stroking River's fur as the puppy wagged his tail and licked the boy's hand. The boy's parents approached, smiling warmly. "Is this the famous River?" the father asked. Luke chuckled. "I guess so. He's got quite the reputation around here." The mother knelt beside her son, her eyes soft. "We heard his story at the shelter fundraiser," she said. "It inspired us to adopt our own dog." She gestured to a nearby blanket, where a small terrier sat, wagging its tail. Luke felt a lump in his throat. "That's amazing," he said. "I'm glad his story made a difference." The father nodded. "It did. And it's clear how much he's done for you, too." Luke glanced down at River, who was now lying on the grass, happily soaking up the sun. "Yeah," he said softly. "He's changed everything." That evening, as Luke and River sat on the porch watching the sunset, Luke reflected on how much had changed since the day he had pulled River from the river. What had started as a moment of compassion had grown into something far greater, a journey of healing, connection, and hope. "You've done so much, buddy," Luke said, scratching River behind the ears. "More than I ever could have imagined." River looked up at him, his eyes full of love and trust. Luke smiled, his heart full. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. As long as River was by his side, he could face anything. The warm days of spring slowly gave way to summer, and the bond between Luke and River only deepened. The once fragile puppy had grown into a strong, spirited dog, his playful energy and unwavering loyalty a constant presence in Luke's life. Together, they had built a new rhythm, one filled with joy, purpose, and a renewed sense of hope. One sunny morning, as Luke sipped his coffee on the porch, River trotted up to him with a stick in his mouth, wagging his tail enthusiastically. Luke chuckled, setting his mug down as he stood. "You never get tired of this game, do you?" he said, taking the stick from River and tossing it across the yard. River bolted after it, his paws kicking up small clouds of dust as he ran. Watching him now, Luke could hardly believe this was the same dog he had rescued from the river months ago. River had not only survived but thrived, and in doing so, he had brought Luke back to life in ways he never thought possible. After a few rounds of fetch, Luke decided to take River to the park. It had become one of their favorite places, a space where River could run freely and interact with other dogs. As they walked through the neighborhood, neighbors greeted them warmly, many stopping to pet River or share a kind word with Luke. "You're looking good, River," one woman said, scratching behind his ears. "And so are you, Luke. That dog has done wonders for you." Luke smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "He really has," he said. "He's changed everything." At the park, River bounded across the open field, his tail wagging as he played with a group of dogs. Luke watched from a bench, a contented smile on his face. It was moments like this that reminded him of how far they had both come, how much they had overcome together. As he sat there, a man approached, carrying a camera and wearing a press badge around his neck. "Excuse me," the man said, his tone polite. "Are you Luke, the man who rescued the dog from the river?" Luke nodded, curious. "That's me. And that's River," he said, gesturing to the dog now chasing a frisbee. The man smiled. "I've heard so much about you too. I'm a reporter for the local paper, and we're doing a feature on inspiring stories from the community. I'd love to include you and River if you're willing to share your journey." Luke hesitated for a moment, but then he thought about everything River's story had already done. The connections it had built, the lives it had touched. "Sure," he said, standing and shaking the man's hand. "We'd be happy to share." The following week, the article about Luke and River was published in the local paper. It recounted the day Luke had found River in the icy waters of the river, the months of recovery and growth that followed, and the profound impact they had had on each other. The story was accompanied by photos of Luke and River at the park, their bond evident in every image. The response was overwhelming. Letters and emails poured in from people who had read the article, many of them sharing their own stories of resilience and hope. Some were inspired to adopt rescue animals, while others simply thanked Luke for reminding them of the beauty of compassion. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a woman named Clara, who had recently lost her husband and had been struggling with grief. "Your story gave me the courage to keep going," she wrote. "River's journey reminded me that even in the darkest times, there is always a chance for healing and hope." Luke read the letter aloud to River one evening, his voice thick with emotion. "You're not just my hero, buddy," he said, scratching River behind the ears. "You're a hero to so many people." River wagged his tail, leaning into Luke's hand. In that quiet moment, Luke felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for River, but for the second chance they had been given together. As the years went by, Luke and River continued to inspire those around them. Their story became a symbol of resilience and the incredible bond between humans and animals. Luke often spoke at community events, sharing their journey and encouraging others to adopt rescue animals or lend a helping hand to those in need. River, now fully grown, remained the heart of Luke's life. His playful spirit and unwavering loyalty were a constant source of joy, and his presence had brought Luke closer to his neighbors, his community, and even himself. Together, they had created a legacy of kindness and compassion, one that would be remembered long after the seasons changed and the years passed. One summer evening, as Luke and River sat on the porch watching the sun set over the river, Luke reflected on everything they had been through. The struggles, the triumphs, the moments of doubt, and the moments of joy, all of it had led them to this point. "You saved me, River," Luke said softly, his hand resting on the dog's back. "You taught me how to live again." River looked up at him, his eyes filled with love and trust. Luke smiled, his heart full. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. As long as River was by his side, he could face anything. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Luke felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. A peace that came from knowing that, together, he and River had found their way home.